that White's objection, this grounding objection, presupposes the controversial view of truth-maker theory. In fact, it's an even more radical view than mere truth-maker theory, but White's objection assumes something called truth-maker maximalism, which, the way I understand it, many truth-maker theorists reject. But yeah, I was really looking forward to this conversation on what view best handles the problem of evil, but the conversation took a different turn. Didn't seem like Dr. White really wanted to talk about the problem of evil, but rather wanted to focus on the problems of Molinism, specifically on this philosophical objection known as the grounding objection raised against middle knowledge. Now, I do think that this is a good topic. I'd love to see, I think Dr. Craig did a fine job having this discussion. I would love to see James White have a conversation with Kirk McGregor on this topic. Kirk's done a lot of work on this lately, and he has a book coming out soon, so stay tuned for that. His book will discuss this issue quite a bit. But with that said, I thought Dr. Craig handled this surprise shift quite nicely, and he explained sufficiently that White's objection, this grounding objection, presupposes the controversial view of truth-maker theory. In fact, it's an even more radical view than mere truth-maker theory, but White's objection assumes something called truth-maker maximalism, which, the way I understand it, many truth-maker theorists reject. So I just want to make it clear that White's objection to Molinism is purely philosophical. It wasn't biblical. And it's also a philosophy that's on a shaky foundation. It's built on an assumption that no one is obligated to share. So with that in mind, it seems to me that this objection that White was posing was rather weak and had no teeth in its bite. Dr. Craig provided a nice counterexample by saying bail doesn't exist, right? And now that demonstrates the weakness of White's objection, because there doesn't seem to be a truth maker that makes that true. But it didn't really seem to make much of a difference to Dr. White. And as expected, Dr. White repeatedly objected that Molinism is not derived from the scriptures, but rather from philosophy. But Dr. Craig rightly pointed out that if he's guilty of that charge, then so is James White. Indeed, White's assumption of exhaustive divine determinism, or as Dr. Craig was calling it, what was he calling it? Universal divine determinism? Yeah. I call it ED. Dr. Craig calls it UD. Take your pick. White's assumption of ED or UD is philosophical, right? It's not derived from scripture. Right. Indeed, we have biblical data refuting this philosophical assumption, and I might share some of that later. So just let me remind our viewers, White's entire objection to Molinism, based on the grounding objection, is purely a philosophical objection and nothing more. And I don't even think it's a good philosophical objection. It might be good in a sense, but I don't find it forceful. So it seems to me that White dismisses philosophy when it shows his views are faulty, but is quick to appeal to philosophy if he thinks it can be used to support his own view. And this seems inconsistent. Moreover, Dr. Craig pointed out that both views, the middle knowledge view and the exhaustive divine deterministic view, are both theological models attempting to explain all the biblical data. All right. So they both take into account what scripture says, and then they both sides try to form a model to best explain the biblical data. So what model, Calvinism or Molinism, best handles all the biblical data? Not just one passage, not just a couple passages, but what model best handles all the biblical data from cover to cover? And if anybody's read my book, they know that Molinism seems to be the best explanation of all the data. Now, I was glad to see that Dr. Craig showed us the multiple volumes of Richard Mueller's history of post-Reformation and Reformed dogmatics, and explained that Reformed theology is permeated by philosophical assumptions concepts and principles that shape and guide it. And I believe that Bill pointed out that the Reformation picked up on much of Catholic philosophy, lock, stock, and barrel. I love that line. Then he gave some specific examples regarding the doctrines of divine necessity, timelessness, spacelessness, simplicity, etc. And I've just got to say, since Dr. Craig brought up Richard Mueller's work, Richard Mueller had a huge influence on my view. In fact, my doctoral supervisor had me read Mueller's work before he would even let me begin writing the first chapter to my dissertation. And by the way, did you say something?
No.
I'm hearing. I'll say I attended the same Reformed university that James White attends. At least I think he's still there. So anyway, all that said, I thought Dr. Craig, although he was probably prepared to have a different discussion, did quite nicely shifting gears and playing defense, to mix metaphors. But then Dr. Craig had a chance to go on the offense. And he argued that on White's view of exhaustive divine determinism, that God causes people to do evil, which in turn logically makes God the author of evil, right? If it's evil to make somebody else do evil, or to causally determine somebody else to do evil in any form or fashion, then that makes the one ultimately causally determine the whole thing to be the author of evil. And that just is absurd if we're going to say that God is evil. So we can't go there. And I was really surprised that White didn't put much of a response to this objection. Indeed, I think because he really kind of left that objection. It was a forceful objection, and he really didn't deal with it. If it was a scored debate, I think that would have been the fatal blow against White's position. So all in all, I thought, although I was hoping to see a different discussion, I'm glad I watched it. Of course, I'm biased, but I thought Dr. Craig and Molinism came out with the victory. In fact, I think this discussion will be appealed to for years to come by those who seek to show the superiority of Molinism over Calvinism. I know I will. What do you think, Tyson?
Yeah, so I thought that was a really good summary of what happened. First, I think you're absolutely right that it kind of veered off topic from the problem of evil to just mainly talking about whether or not Scripture better supports Calvinism or Molinism, which that is a strategy to take. But they really didn't get around to specifically talking about the problem of evil. Mm-hmm. So it seems like White's strategy was just to try and go for the jugular and put forward a rebutting defeater, which is to say, if what he said was true about the grounding objection, then Molinism is not even an option because there are no counterfactuals of creaturely freedom from which God can providentially superintend evil in the world. So that's a good tactic. Unfortunately, he is woefully underread on this topic, and so he was met with concepts that he had never encountered before, and that Dr. Craig had dealt with extensively. I mean, he spent years researching this topic, and unfortunately, the talk could have been more substantive if White had been better prepared. And I think this is a paradigmatic example of why philosophy is so important to theology. That's why I think the future of theology and progress in theology and writing will be in the analytic theology tradition or school, because you simply can't do good theology without good philosophy.
And that doesn't mean these analytic theologians are going to be ignoring Scripture.
Right, exactly. I saw several times in the chat during the live stream that Dr. Craig is a philosopher and White is a theologian, and I was just like, these people don't realize that Dr. Craig has doctorates in both philosophy and theology. He is a theologian, and he uses the tools of philosophy to come up, to do his theology. in a very precise, very meaningful way that a lot of theologians, they don't have the training to do. And I think that's what makes his research and writing so much better. The quality is just so much better.
Amen to that.